assets because it's like, hey, you know what, there's not a ton of theoretical opportunity for doing it, but because it may be the market closes at 5, well, you know, and you want to trade at 9 o'clock, that might be difficult in traditional rails. So there are plenty of examples of that. Moving money is one of them, because moving money is not a 24-hour instant payment 365 thing in the US. It is in some other countries, but we've created an opening for digital assets to be able to succeed in the money movement business in the United States, because frankly of a lack of innovation that had occurred in the course of the past 10, 15 years, whereas there are other countries that I think that have innovated more rapidly and faster immediate payments base than the US has. And that's a pity. It's not too late, but we should really get on that if we want to make sure that traditional money movements continue to dominate in the financial system in the next 10 years. So mobility of assets is bucket number one. The second bucket is assets that are clunky in the traditional financial rails. You know, loans are not really fully adopted into digital, automated ways of settling. Settling a US equity is pretty clean and easy. Moving money, as long as you're doing it within the appropriate hours, is pretty clean and easy. But settling a loan, moving a loan from A to B, me novating it to you, that's a messy business. And so that's an example. Real estate is another. Physical commodities another. Those are examples of assets that don't really have a belonging. They exist on the side of the financial system, not maybe in the heart of it. So they're very ripe for technology, which is a much more multi-dimensional ledger, much easier so bringing them on board, bringing other assets on board would be, I would say, bucket number 2. And then bucket number 3 is, if you're going to operate in more of an on-chain world, you need an on-chain currency. And that's where stablecoin represents, I think, the answer to that question, because for different reasons, Bitcoin and Ethereum, they have volatility associated with their value. And it's very awkward when you're trying to buy or sell something to be using a currency for payment that doesn't, in fact, have a stable value. So having a stable value currency on-chain for payment is sensible. Again, if the US dollar rails were instantaneous, fully promulgated everywhere, then you could use a digital representation of that same thing on chain, but that's not the case. And so that's created the opening for stablecoins, and so they live in this third bucket as a means to enable the other two. That's how I think about digital assets, and I suspect the world will play out in that way. And I think the message to traditional financial services firms, including ours, is make sure that we are innovating, not only with digital assets, but also in the traditional rails, so that we don't get completely overrun by a new digital asset ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. So I know you've declined to answer on this before, but would BNY explore or launch its own stablecoin?
So I do get asked that question a lot. We're in the business of enabling other people's business models first and foremost, and so we didn't, and I didn't avoid the question. I just said I don't love the idea of us having to launch our own stablecoin. I would much rather be in the business of providing capabilities to enable other stable coins to prosper, because I think that's the DNA of our company. And so, if you will, kind of rails on which other people's stable coins are built. But, you know, we don't say no to anything. The other thing is, what about companies who want kind of their own stable coin for use inside their own books and records, but they don't have the scale to want to build one? And maybe for some reason or another, they don't want to use somebody else's. Maybe they would want to use a white label technology from us. And so that's something that we also are quite open to. So we're in the enablement business. That's what our platforms and businesses are about. They're about enabling our customers. And we've got a lot of these other stablecoin operators and issuers who are very significant customers of ours, and we're very happy and proud to support their businesses. We get to support them with all the other things that we do: payments, custody, asset management, on-ramps, off-ramps, and being this bridge between the digital asset rails and the traditional rails is a good place for us to be.
I think the bigger question, too, when it comes to blockchain is how fundamentally it's going to change the financial plumbing of the country. Is this just going to be a different use case or a different form of payments, or is it going to actually change the entire undergirding of the financial system? And I know someone like Jamie Dimon in the past, who's been skeptical of blockchain, or at least Bitcoin, recently has said, yes, I think tokenization is real, but might not have the biggest ramifications that some people think. I'm curious what your view is. Is this going to be underlying everything 10 years from now? Is it going to still be somewhat limited in its scope? How are you viewing that?
I don't think anybody knows the answer. There are different people coming from different perspectives who have reason to want to argue that one thing should be the case or evangelize one outcome versus another. If you go back to the first principle of it, what is it? Well, what it is a technology. And so if you look at basic examples, not everybody uses spreadsheets, but spreadsheets are one way to create calculations and outcomes. There are plenty of other ways to maintain numerical information and inputs and outputs, and so spreadsheet's not the only one, but it's a commonly used tool because it's very fit for certain purposes, especially on a desktop. But you don't essentially create some massive compute cluster just using spreadsheets in order to be able to calculate outputs. So if you think about it as a technology, then the answer is, okay, where it best is solving a problem and where it is most fit for purpose for that outcome. When I look at an equity trade or an equity settlement, it's very fashionable at the moment to say, oh, great, let's create an equity token representation of an equity so that we can, so customers can also use that. In reality, it's a sort of a shadow instrument. It's not really solving any problems that aren't solved. Equity trading is incredibly efficient. It's incredibly cheap. It's very, very high volume. It's actually more expensive to trade it in other forms because there are more people trying to extract rent out of the life cycle of the token. And so when I look at that, I'm like, I'm not sure it's really solving a problem. And where there isn't a problem to be solved, at some point people start to realize that they're paying for a bit of a novelty factor. Having said that, in other parts of the financial system, like I said, assets, there is actually an inefficiency waiting to be solved. And so I think the calling again for the financial services industry is, if we think that the way certain things happen today is actually the right way and a better way for some reason, then make sure that there is the appropriate mobility, 24/7 portability, etc. Because otherwise, if the use case of tokenization and digital assets is genuinely better, you should assume over time it should win out.
So let's talk the other massively transformative technology, which is AI. You already brought up how BNY has been exploring this the past couple of years with ELIZA, which is the AI platform the company has developed. I believe it's 98% of employees have been trained on it.
It was 99 now.
Almost 99%. Get to that last 100% soon.
Yes, there are two ways to get to 100% actually on something like that, but yes, that's exactly right.
So why did you decide on ELIZA as this first major AI push for BNY? And maybe you can explain a bit what ELIZA does and how it's changing the company.
Sure. Well, look, ELIZA was the name of Alexander Hamilton's wife, so that's where the name comes from. But the strategy, which we've really been embarking on now for 2.5 years, was a point of view, which I think we were right on, but it was a bit more of a bet at the time. The world moves so quickly in AI, it's hard to remember what things felt like 2.5 years ago. But it was a bet that multi-agentic was going to be the way to go. And again, that was a little bit of a calculus and one that you have to test the thesis very regularly to see if it's evolved. But we made the bet that the future of AI was going to be multi-agentic. And secondly, that there weren't going to be, in the early days, any real good providers of horizontal multi-agentic platforms, that you could be multi-agentic in a vertical way that is sort of locked in with one of the AI providers, and you could live in their ecosystem and you could use their agents exclusively to solve the problems, but they would be a bit more domain-centric. So if you were going to use Salesforce, they've got wonderful agents, Agentforce, and it's a terrific set of products, but you live in that world. And there are many other providers like that. It's true for Microsoft, it's true for Google, and really all of the other providers. But if you wanted to have avoid being stuck in one of those beautiful walled gardens and actually wanted to be more horizontal, then we wanted to have our own horizontal platform in which we could plug in all of those other agents, and those agents would be able to operate in our ecosystem. And so we would be able to take full advantage of other people's agents, but we wouldn't be confined to just using either one set of agents or to have a series of different walled gardens that didn't connect and talk to each other, which we saw as a potential risk. So hence the strategy. And with that as our backdrop, We've collaborated very deeply with a lot of the other AI firms in order to be able to come up with the execution of our strategy. And all joking aside about the 99% of people who've done the initial prerequisite training,